what kind of future are we actually heading into?
Because beneath all the noise, all the headlines, all the political theater, there's a deeper question. How do you protect your wealth, make wise decisions, and stay grounded when the economic tides keep shifting right underneath you?
And that's what makes today's conversation so interesting because our guest isn't just somebody who studies the markets from a distance. He spent decades inside the wealth management world, advising successful families, navigating uncertainty, and watching how money, policy, and human behavior all collide.
Today, we're joined by Richard McWhorter, managing partner and private wealth advisor at SRM Private Wealth. And this one goes way beyond the surface level money talk.
We get into Richard's journey through the industry, what he learned working inside large firms, why independence matters enough to build something more personal, and how that changed the way he thinks about his clients, advice, and real alignment.
And from there, the conversation opens up into debt, deficits, interest rates, and the Federal Reserve, not to mention political incentives and the economic forces shaping lives of families and business owners right now.
But maybe the biggest question underneath all of this conversation is, what is wealth management really supposed to do for a person? Is it just about returns, or is it about clarity, stewardship, freedom, and knowing how to think when the world gets really, really noisy?
So if you ever felt overwhelmed by the headlines, uncertain about where the economy is headed, or just curious how someone at Richard's level sees the world, this episode is going to give you a look behind the curtain. This is episode 190 with the Five Guys. Let's get into it.
So, Richard, before we get into wealth markets and everything happening in the economy today, I'd love to start with your story. How did you get into this business of wealth management, and how did it shape the way that you think about advising today?
Yeah, that's a long story. I was 17 when I started in this business, so I just got out of high school, and at 17 years of age, I got an internship at Dean Witter Reynolds, which doesn't exist any longer, and we worked there. I worked there for 4 years, and then in 1992, I got my break, and a couple of the financial advisors that were there asked me if I would come over with them to, at that time, Payne Weber, and got my license at Payne Weber. So that was 1992, and it's been 34 blissful years.
I find nowadays a lot of young people, they're not willing to put in any time or effort into, growing. You said that you put in 4 years before you were even given a shot. I mean, how'd you make it through that time? Or was it just something that you had to do back in the day to get to where you wanted to?
Yeah, back then it was, I think a lot of the struggle that you go through at that time that's the part I remember the most out of it, out of everything. I remember not being able to turn on the lights on in my apartment at the time, right? Because I was not making no money, and you're working as an intern, and back then interns were really paid, and so I had another job that I had to work at night, and but failure in this. You knew it was there, but it was never an option. That's not. I'm way too competitive for the idea of allowing myself to fail in that. So, and I was very fortunate. So, yeah, I agree with you though. By the way, I've got 6 kids, and the grind is a lot different.
Yeah. So it took you 4 years. You finally got your shot to become an advisor, get licensed. Tell me a little bit about that experience once you finally had your opportunity. You said you weren't going to fail.
Yeah, at that time, when I was given the opportunity, I was a senior in college, and I couldn't do both, so I had to drop out of college at the time. And when I did that, something really interesting occurred. I was always pretty confident in myself. I lost a lot of that confidence during that period of time, and it was a good thing, not a bad thing. And that insecurity that dropping out of college did to me was there was no way I was going to be the guy that was just some college dropout in people's minds, right? And so I had to really work much harder, so I wasn't ever considered to be that guy. I ended up going back just to finish it up, just because later on it was just that that chapter that wasn't quite finished yet for me, and that, as I said, that insecurity that I did not want to be the guy that was looked down on for not knowing enough because you didn't finish, even though I went through 5 years of college at the time. And so a lot of my story in this business was dictated on what those early years and that insecurity did for me.
Tell me more about that. I find that insecurity, that anxiety or fear of failure, fear of being judged by other people, it holds many people back. It's what stops most entrepreneurs from even ever starting their company, and it just keeps them inside of what's locked in their head where they control
For
all
sure.
the variables. How did you get past that, especially after losing some of your confidence in yourself?
For sure. It's how you pick yourself up during those periods of time. For me, it was, I had to start learning, and I had to start really, I never wanted to have that question about, oh, well, you're that college dropout guy and you don't have that, you didn't finish. And I never, so I spent so much time on learning and reading that it took away even those questions of somebody from, does he know enough to be my financial advisor? So the insecurity thing for me was, I don't, when I was younger, I suppose there was a lot more of, what other people thought about me and all that stuff. The biggest failure from my perspective is to yourself. It's, so as much as the idea was the outside world looking at me and judging me, the reality is I was judging myself, and judging yourself. I'm much more critical about what and who I am than anybody else can be. You can tell me something or judge me in any way. It's not going to offend me as much as I already offended myself, right? Because that's just how I'm wired. It's that very competitive, let's go, you can do this, right? Attitude. And that's what's driven me. I was competitive in many sports over my life, and each one of those is you're pushing yourself a little bit harder. Even now at my age, you're still that never goes away. So.
Yeah. And as someone you're speaking, Rich, as someone who has that exact same, inner monologue that is constantly pushing you to be better, and no matter how well you went, it's not good enough. And I think that's a great driving force. But from what I gather from both myself and from many of our audience members who are in the same boat, is that it's a double-edged sword, and that it can really cut you when you feel like you're never able to amount to good enough. Have you ever struggled with that in yourself?
For sure. And it was actually my wife that taught me to give myself some grace. I play golf, right? So I love golf. During COVID, I was a index of a 27. Today, I'm an index of an 8.5. So, and I only tell you that when I play golf, it is the most difficult thing I've ever done in sports, bar none. And that inner voice inside of you that's driving you, you have to pick yourself up over and over and over again. One bad shot, you can hit 3 amazing shots and one bad shot, and then it screws up the whole hole or the whole round. And my point is that that's the love of pushing yourself through these different obstacles, that and to get to maintain that and to continue to drive forward. And every single day you're trying to get a little bit better. I think about it all the time, and it's such a wonderful experience for me that by the way, I'll never figure golf out. I mean, the idea of these professionals and the way that they play is, so amazing, and they still have bad shots, right? And that's what we have to remember. And the wonderful thing about the reason I love economics so much is that it's inexact science. There's never an end result of that. And people, friends of mine will tell me how crazy that thought process is, right? Why would you get involved in things that you're never going to quite master? And it's that ongoing journey of it all. And there's so much and such a vibrant amount of information in economics, and there's so much nuance to golf. That's how that's the things that I love more than, obviously my family is different, but more than anything else is just that pushing myself one step at a time, incrementally, to get to that just one step better.
Yeah, we like to call it here, the Five Guys, the aggregation of marginal gains. You're just trying to get 1% better every day. And in truth, in this life, you're never going to reach the mountaintop, right? Like you and your friends that said, oh, why would you choose something that you can't master? Like what in life can you master? And if you can master it, is it really even worth pursuing?
That's a great, the great point. And I love the way you said that, because it's much more articulate than the way I tried to explain that. But I do think that, listen, as you know, in this world of ours today, everyone's got a very definitive opinion about everything. And they've got it figured out, and you're either right with them or you're wrong with them. And it's this divisiveness. The reality in a lot of that stuff, from my perspective, is that we have no idea what the hell we're talking about. And listen, man, I study economics every single day. That's all I do, right? I was running unemployment figures last night, right? And I go through it and I read the reports and I try and understand where's employment being created, where's it not being created, and it's fascinating to me. And that might be really geeky for some people, but I love that stuff. And my point is that I'll never truly understand how unemployment works, right? I'll never truly understand how inflation works. I'll never truly understand how the economy works. Or, if you go through policies that are being implemented over the, whether, I don't care if it's Trump or Biden or Obama, I don't care about any of that stuff. Go through the policies, look at the ramifications of those policies, look at how they came up with that, look at the potential, what happens if. That's the fascinating world. To truly believe that I'm going to understand or be so definitive in my opinion that you can't have an opinion because I'm right and you're wrong is ridiculous to me. And so for me, it's looking and critically thinking through both sides of those arguments and understanding the potential of each side of those arguments. And if we understand that there's potential, that means that there is no definitive opinion. There's no one knows the true outcome of any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So,
I find it very interesting. I've been saying a lot more often to people that know me and in here on the podcast that I think the most dangerous thing someone can be is certain in life.
for sure.
I know what the answer is and it's definitive, especially in times like this where it feels like maybe the pie is shrinking, like economics really is not working for many people. So we all start to tribe up, right? And I don't care if you're right or you're left. You just want to see somebody put the smack down on the other people and let me get what's mine before this sinks ships. And regardless of the sink is ship or if the ship is sinking or not, when we all feel like the pie is getting more and more constrained, everyone just tries to tribe up. It's innate to us as animals that have been around. I always like to say we have a 10,000-year-old brain in a modern day body. So we are used to this tribal warfare. And whenever you're in a war, you don't want to be the person standing alone. So we're going to try to collect to a group and have our group attack that other group and let's take theirs.
Right. And listen, there's an old adage about crabs in a barrel, right? And you put crabs in a barrel and they're all trying to get out. And when they get out, they go off on their own. They don't come back to help the others get out. And so we as human beings, especially not just we as human beings, but we as American human beings, I think have a tendency to follow along with that concept of we are trying to get that little piece that, if 35% of the wealth is in the hands of 20 people, and then the rest of it's split up amongst the other 327 million people, or whatever the number is today. The idea is that we want to get our piece, and how much are we willing to pull back the other people to get out of the barrel versus, and climb over them? Or how much are we willing to come back after we get out of the barrel to bring the others with us? And that's always an interesting concept. And I think capitalism in general is a system that's set up specifically for that. And not to say that I'm not saying capitalism is bad in any way. I'm a 100% diehard capitalist, but the reality is that there is a happy medium and all that with how much is enough and how much do I need, and is it worth truly pulling people back or down so that I can get ahead? And I don't think that they're on the spectrum. I'm not a tendency towards socialism, but I'm on the capitalistic side. I'm kind of on the moderate capitalist in doing those types of things.
Yeah, I think so many people they hear of capitalism, they think of socialism, and then they think it's these two extremes. Like it's either all the way left, it's all the way right. Where
Right.
in truth, like even the Buddha talked about this over 3,000 years ago. It's like you have to find the middle path. There's pathology on both sides, but our brain, again, probably because it's a 10,000-year-old brain in a modern day body, in order to conserve calories, is going to just it's this all the way, and I don't have to think about it anymore. Decision made. Let's move forward. I have other things to worry about. But when you start to fall into that certainty of it's this all the time, the more you kind of go through your life, you realize anything that someone says where they say it's always this or it's never this, that's the only time it's always wrong to use that word, is when someone uses always or never.
No, it's a valid point. And I find that, listen, we deal with people of some significant wealth. And if I had to make one statement is that money does not buy happiness. And that's out of my experience. And they're wonderful people, but it's hard to find that happiness. It's hard to have that one aspect of our daily lives. The rest of us are trying to accumulate enough to maintain our standard of living. Their standard of living is all taken care of at whatever level they want to be at. That differential takes away something. It really does. It also creates so much distrust. It causes so many different other issues that the rest of us don't have. And so I do find that we're fighting for this thing with the concept of what that means. And the reality is when you get there and you have that concept taken care of, it's not satisfying. And so what I've learned in my life and my career is that what I remember the most, like I said earlier, is the struggle. It was, man, remembering what it was like to walk around with a Coke can and a candle and a Coke can and not have the money to turn on the lights in your apartment because you didn't have the deposit money. I remember those days. And it still comes back to me 35 years later, going, I don't want to be in that position anymore. And to this day, we run 2.2 billion or whatever it is. I'm still, every single day, I think about what happens if, right? You would think that that's a nice book for a financial advisor to have. In my opinion, it never stops. That never ends for me. And by the way, that's a wonderful thing for the way I look at it.
Yeah. So with that thought process of, I kind of think of Jeff Bezos or not Jeff Bezos, whoever is the CEO of NVIDIA, who's, we're one day away.
Yeah. Jason Wong.
Yeah, Jason, or we're one day away from being bankrupt, or one day away from the company shutting down all the time. Right. Do you find that makes it hard to commit to things, or to try to wake up every day when you have that nagging fear at the in the back of your mind?
Just the opposite. It gives purpose every day. Right? It's kind of like going onto a golf course and your score at the beginning is that you're at 0, right? Today's going to be the day I'm going to break 70 or I'm going to break 80 or whatever that number is that you're trying to do. And the reality is that we'll see how it works out. But you're fighting for that all day through that entire round of golf. The idea of waking up and knowing everything is set and I'm good and it's certain. I don't need that would be so foreign to my way of thinking. I wouldn't even know. I wouldn't know how to handle that, to be honest. Right. Because you've been in survival mode since I was a kid. Right. And that doesn't stop now. Right. It doesn't stop now that you're 56 years old. You know, in my mind, I'm still 16, 17. You take me to a rock concert, I promise you, I'm trying to be 16, 17. My back may be going out when I'm trying to do that. But my point is that a lot of that stuff is we still in our minds are children, right? We're maybe teenagers, right? But, you know, everything else has kind of evolved over time, your life, your responsibilities, all of those things. And my point in all this is that if you always remember where you came from and what you've had to do to get to this point, that is a humbling statement always, because you can always go back there. And many, many, many people do.
Do you think that most people aren't trying to struggle anymore? They just want it to be easy, and until their life is that place where they feel it should be easy, they're just gonna suffer even more, not even love the journey because they're trying to get to the end where they don't have to think, don't have to work, don't have to try anymore.
Yeah, I think the get rich quick scheme has always been there and always will be there, right? I mean, nowadays, you know, I would debate that, you know, these kids that are coming up that are influencers and all, you know, the money that comes in as quickly as it potentially does, you know, that's amazing to me, right? I mean, the amount of money that these kids are seeing from really they might have talent in their way that they connect through social media and how they've beat the algorithms, or I don't even know all the right terms to be used. But because it's different than, you know, people look at like a musician or an athlete and they look at this as an overnight success, right? When they all of a sudden come on the scene and kill it, right? Or they get drafted and we don't know the 20 years prior, the 18 years prior that they've been working out every single day and practicing for hour upon hour upon hour, got genetically were superior, right? Bigger, taller, faster. All those things make it not an overnight success. We're seeing the overnight success of it all. Right. So, you know, and I find this with my own children is that it's hard for me to explain the first 20 years of my career for what they've only seen the last 15, 16 years. Right. So that 20 years, though, that's the part I remember more than anything else. The you know, the where we're at today in what I do and is an offshoot of that first 20 years and making lots and lots of mistakes and failing many, many, many times to get to this point. So, you know, I always find that fascinating how people don't really look at what it took to get there and just assume that it's, you know, you got either lucky or you happen to be smarter than other people or you're more athletic or whatever that turns out to be. So.
Yeah, I find that especially nowadays with social media, with influencers like you brought up earlier, no one's talking about the struggle anymore. So young people and you know, even people who are my age who aren't as young, but we get kind of brainwashed into thinking like, oh, if I don't have it now at this age, I'm never gonna get it. So maybe for our audience, Rich, we should go back to those 20 years of struggle and you know, tell me more about how you made it through those dark times and you remember them fondly now.
Yeah, you know, as I stated, you know, when we first started in the business, when I first started in the business, I you know, I had no money, and you know, listen, I had parents that did well enough, but you know, the thing I hated more than anything was having to go back and ask them for money. Right. And I don't know why that is. It always has been. So, you know, looking back at that time, you know, I was too stubborn or too, my ego was too big to go back and tell my parents I was having a hard time. And I was living with a girl at that point. And she was kind of similar with her parents. So we kind of struggled through it and made it through. And it took us a couple months to save up the money for the deposit, and we did it. And that first 10 years of my career, you're back then when you were the first one in and the last one out was the way it worked. So, if you got in around 5:30, 6 in the morning, and you tried to be the first guy to make it in, especially when you're in your 20s and maybe you've gone out having a couple drinks the night before and then trying to get back at 5:30 the next morning to get in soon enough. And then you're the last one to leave, and you're leaving at 10, 11 o'clock at night, or 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 at night, and going to have a drink and then going home. And that's kind of what we did for many, many years. It was that much work. And then that was for the first 7 years, it was probably brutal. And I know that in 1999, I was ready to get out of the business. It sucked. And
where were you at that time? Which practice?
I was at Smith Barney. So a bunch of us had left Payne Weber about a year and a half into it, because we were heard that there was management disarray, and that we heard that they were going to close down the branch. So we all went to 4 or 5 of us went to one Smith Barney branch that actually I was an intern at when I knew the people there. So, but in 99, I remember going to a manager. He was an assistant manager at the office I was in. And I just basically said to him, I'm like, I'm just going to go into management, and I'm going to get out of being an advisor. And I'm done. It's so hard, and I'm working 16-hour days. And he said, just give it a second. Just, you're almost there. Give it a second. And I had to find a way that I could maintain. And so what I did at that time was I just increased the amount of studying that I started doing. And I just wanted to become, I hate using the word expert, because I just don't think that that's right. I just wanted to be more competent in what I was doing and get better and better at what I was doing. And so I started studying my butt off. And I just started reading everything. I started off at Warren Buffett. I started off with Adam Smith, and then I went up through and we did, Buffett stuff all the way through, from everything that he would recommend to read to his own math. And they got books and books and books on this stuff. And then we got into Bridgewater and a bunch of other people that I really respect in the business. And I just studied everything, and I've been studying ever since. And, I think that I needed to love what I was doing so that I would continue to do it. And I wanted to do it. If I'm going to do it, I want to do it at the best level that I can get myself to. It's like sports, right? I don't want to play. I'm not the type of person that goes out and wants to play golf once every couple months and do that. That's no fun for me, to be honest. I am way too competitive with myself to allow myself to do that. So that drive of wanting to be better at what I did brought love to my practice. And that's kind of what I do every day. Is I can't tell you how much I enjoy what I'm doing today. And I will also tell you that without getting political in any way, the current administration has increased my love of the intellect of it all. And the reason for that is, it's finding out the ramifications. And it has been one of the most challenging year and couple months, is trying to figure out the ramifications, because there's so much going on simultaneously that I think, unlike any other administration, there's just so much going on that I'm trying to figure out which way this thing could go on both sides of the argument. And it has been a wonderful intellectual journey that I've been on since really 1999, and it just keeps obviously expanding to this point. So
Yeah, that kind of goes back to our original conversation, right? About never being able to master something.
that's right.
You mentioned a few authors, a few books. Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, I'm assuming is what you're talking about.
Yes.
Warren Buffett, maybe The Snowball or some biographies you've read. Mentioned Bridgewater, so I'm assuming you're talking Ray Dalio there.
Yeah. And Howard Marks is another one that I love listening to. I'm a podcast fiend in Los Angeles. It's wonderful because there's so much traffic everywhere I go. So I can get in 3 or 4 podcasts a day. But Mark Zandi over at Moody's, I will give a shout out to. He's a wonderful, thoughtful economist, and I really appreciate what Dalio has to say and what Buffett had to say. And, these guys that have been uber successful and are sharing their voice in either their writings or their podcasts. It really, it's funny. Every time I get out of the car, I've got 5 or 6 things to look into when I get out, because these guys bring up some stuff that I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even think of it that way. And they've got such wonderful perspectives. So I do appreciate all, several of these guys. There's many that I would not give the 2 cents of my time or my brain power to, but those are definitely some of the most thoughtful, I think.
Yeah. We live in a society, especially here in America, that when I was growing up, at least, there was clearly a right answer to everything. And it beat the love of learning out of me, because when you're told like, no, that's the wrong answer, that's the wrong answer, that's the wrong answer. And someone like me who struggled a lot as a kid, it took me a long time to come back to this love of learning. But if I could give anyone like one piece of advice, it's you need to learn to love that journey, because you're never going to reach it. And that's the thing that's going to continue to propel you to get to the next place in life.
Right.
Is that something you felt was inborn into you to have that love for knowledge, or is it something you had to develop?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't quite know. I mean, I will tell you that in high school and college, I didn't try very hard. I got decent grades, but I didn't, and I'm not saying that I didn't need to. I didn't get, straight A's. I never tried out that hard. So it wasn't until, all of a sudden, by the way, back in the day when you start off, it was a phone and a phone book and a Quotron that you spun next door like this, and we're fighting with the guy next to you for who was going to be able to use the computer. And basically, the manager of the office will come and say, here's your phone book and here's your leads, and hope to see you in 6 to 9 months. And that was about as much support as you got. So you had to kind of figure it out. Yeah, it's not, I know that I've got some people that have worked for me that, they want everything to be kind of lined up. Here's what you do, and here's how you do it, and it's very structured. This business is not structured in any way, and how you build it, they don't care. They don't care how you find clients. They don't care how you build relationships. They don't care about any of that stuff. They care about the idea that you're bringing people in, or new assets in, and creating commissions back in the day around that. So, a lot of the guys that I know that I started off with, they, were buying mutual funds. And back then, mutual funds paid 8% to the advisors, or they were called stockbrokers back when I started. And I was a municipal bond and CD guy. So I was selling CDs cold calling with CDs back in the day. And by the way, I was the worst cold caller of all time. I was petrified of the phone. I think that the lesson that stands out more than anything is this fear of failure, this concept that failure is somehow a bad thing. Failure is how I learned. Failure is, you tried so many different ways of building a business and who you, and I had to figure out who I was as a human being, right? I was telling someone earlier today that I was on the phone with that I have to go to this, I don't have to go. I'm going to this Milken thing, Milken Institute over here in Beverly Hills on next week. And it's the hardest thing for me to do is be around 100, 200, 300 people that I don't know, most of them. And I'll glob onto somebody that I do know because I'm not that social person that can do those types of things. You put me in I was just in Pebble Beach this last weekend playing golf, and I was put with people. I went up there by myself, and I was put with people that I don't know. My power is that I know where I'm good. I'm good in 3 to 10 people, right? I can play on a poker table, and I do pretty well having the conversations. I can play on a golf course, and I'm pretty good at having those conversations. You put me in a room 100 people, I'm a wallflower. And my point in bringing this up is that you have to understand that about you, who you are, not who they want you to be, not who that you think you need to be, not any of that stuff. You have to be who you are. People feel that, you know, when you show them who you are, when you're vulnerable, not trying to be this person that you're not. And we can feel that. There's an energy to that. And for many, many, many years, I was that guy. I wear my suit and I always said it was my costume. I had to put on my costume every day, right? Which was my suit and tie, because it's not who I am. And until I started being who I was, I never felt comfortable as truly that guy. So when I allowed myself to become to show who I am, that's when my business really started to do well. But it wasn't until then. So the confidence that I got from all the studying, all the failures I've gone through, getting through those things, pushing on to the next one, trying something else, understanding that failure is not bad and it's good, in my opinion, and then allowing yourself to be who you are. That's what I try and teach my children, is to follow who they are. And I think that those are the most important lessons that I found over the last 34 years. I apologize.
It takes me back to our boy Socrates, know thyself. It all starts right there.
But you know, man, I listen, a lot of people out there that I know that are, they think that this is what you're supposed to do. They think, they're salesmen. They're not advisors. They're suits. They're not, they're on the weekends, they're not that guy. What if we can just be us? And by the way, some people are suits in their suits, right? That's who they are on the weekends, right? They like to get all dressed up and be whatever. And that's fine. That's them. But being who you are, understanding who you are, is probably the most important thing that I have learned about myself. And I will tell you, that's only been over the last 15 years, right? Before that, it was much more difficult. I was playing, I was in my role. I had my costume on and I was in my role.
Do you feel, because many of our listeners, myself included, are, younger millennials, Gen Z, and a lot of us feel like we are wearing a costume because we're not given an opportunity unless you put that costume on.
For sure.
So how can you be true to yourself and be in the right rooms, be even given the opportunity? Or do you have to go and create your own opportunity and F what they say, I'm going to go build it myself if you're not going to give me a shot?
You know what I found is that the value, my value to some people is more important than what I'm wearing or who I'm trying to portray myself to be. So if I have the opportunity to open my mouth with them, that's much more important. And there's a lot of rooms that I go into that people will look down, even at my age, right? And they still look down as like, oh, what does he know? Look at the way, right? Look at, he's not dressed in a suit and tie, right? But let's go into a conversation. Bring that on. right? And the confidence of that portrays through, I think. So I will tell you, and I've said this before, is that like, this is only over the last 15. For the first 21, I had to wear that costume, or I felt I did, right? And I wasn't confident enough in myself at the time to do that. And maybe I wouldn't have been accepted into some of those rooms because if I had not put that suit and tie on at the time. Nowadays, it's not even a thought. It's not. It just doesn't come up anymore. And whatever that is, that pheromone that maybe I put off because of my arrogance or my confidence, whatever, whichever those are, maybe they're the same. I think both of those things are signs that I am truly who I am. Sorry. Apologize for that. Thought I turned it off. But anyway, so that's the deal. That I do think that there's a absolute energy, that true confidence, true being who you are, and just being that person does bring across. So, I don't have an answer as to when the right time of that is. And I mean, for some, maybe it never comes, but I feel very fortunate that I truly think I know, at least for the time being, who I am.
Where do you think when someone feels maybe they know themselves well enough, but just aren't given the opportunity, maybe, where do they find their tribe, the people to connect with them might be able to give them that opportunity?
It's a great question. I think, once again, I think it's, I think two things. I think the first thing is that it's trying a bunch of different things, right? And just trying it out. And don't be closed off. You don't know which door is going to open up, and or where that door is going to come from. But I do think that a lot of people in general are going down a path that they think they should go down, rather than one that they maybe should not. But it's to their tribe, to your point, right? I think also that, and someone told me this when I broke up with my girlfriend when I was in my 20s. He said that because I'm not very good at going to bars, and back in the day, and we'd have to go to bars and find people to meet. I was never very good at that. So he said, "Hey, my wife goes out and she goes water skiing." And I'm like, "Oh my God, I would never water skied in my life, but I would love to go to water skiing." He goes, "Oh yeah, there's a bunch of girls out there, and maybe you can meet somebody that way." I'm like, "Okay, well that's a good idea, because what's the worst case scenario is I get to do something I've never done before and it's fun. Best case scenario is I find someone that I want to hang out with, and I get to go water skiing." And so I did that for 8 years. And I never met anybody. There was a couple that we hung out with, but there was never really met that person, my person. But I will tell you, on the other side of that, I became a competitive water skier and had a wonderful time doing that. And my point in all this is that I do think that there's a lot of things that you can do to find those people that are like you, doing the things that you like to do just naturally. So if you're into sports, if you play in a basketball league or a tennis league, or now paddle tennis, and not paddle tennis, pickleball, and or golf, right? If you're into more, I don't know, poetry or whatever it may be, spoken word stuff, or there's all these different wonderful places. And I live in Los Angeles, so I'm speaking out of turn here, because maybe it's not like that. It's everywhere. But every single night there's something going on of different clubs and meetings and all those types of things. And so, for me, it was trying all of that. And I don't know if I mentioned this, but I ran a poker game every 2 months, right? That's how I met so many of the people that I still work with today, and that some of my closest friends have come out of that $100 buy-in poker game that I ran in Beverly Hills. And how would I just invited 10 people and I asked everyone to meet and bring somebody for the group to meet, and bought people drinks and some food. And the next thing you know, we're creating these relationships. And how would I know that would work? By the way, I didn't. And the second thing is that I did that with the idea that, what's the worst case? The worst case is I get to play poker with some friends. That's my worst case. So that's kind of how I look at, the way in which to find that group is to do like-minded things.
Yeah. There's so much serendipity in that you couldn't have never predicted the outcome.
No.
I always like to think back to the success isn't guaranteed, but the journey is. So find something that you're going to enjoy the journey, even if you're failing at it. I think so many people nowadays, when they hear about like, oh, go and try to make friends, like network, like actually do this, they go into it with this thought process of like, all right, I'm going to do this thing. It's going to have an immediate payout.
Right.
And if it doesn't have an immediate payout, they're like, all right, this didn't work. Let me go find another thing. And that's why, even for myself, I try to tell myself, it's important to go do something that you love. And even if nothing comes out of it, the fact that you love doing it is a win in itself.
That's exactly right. I think that a lot of people want something to quantify very quickly. If I put $100 into something, I want $100 back, or $50 back, or right, positively $50. The reality is that in my world is I never, ever, ever know whether or not something's going to pay off, and never go into it with any agenda or any expectations. And I've learned that over my life, because I was so many times that you get disappointed, where you think that something's going to start to pan out. Or, I said this to someone the other day, that I was like, if I had $1 for every dollar I was promised, I would be a gazillionaire to this day. Right. And 90, I never count anything until it's actually, that I've seen it, or it's like a client coming to me and saying, I've got an inheritance coming, and when my parents pass, and I'm like, well, that's not real. There's no reality to that. So we don't even know what that means. So don't even think that way. Right. So I do think that, we do want this quantification of that we put in this time or this effort or this money, and we get an immediate payout. I will tell you that some of the largest relationships that I have today came from people that I have known for 20, 30 years that I never talked business with. We just had a friendship, and something came across their desk. And the next thing you know, I was one of the 2 or 3 people that was referred in. And it was just these random occurrences from years and years and years of them getting to feel comfortable and knowing who you are, and that opportunity to come up, right, that had to cross their desk instead of their colleague's desk, right? It's all of that. So many things have to go so right for you to be there, but you have to, the concept of luck is always something that comes up. And the reality is luck is only there because you've put yourself in the position that you could be lucky. Right. So I do believe that. And I do believe that I'm going to continue to put myself into places that I want to be. And I want whatever comes back from that. I don't know. I don't know, right? Doing a podcast, right? Is there a quantification of what this means? Probably not,
No.
right? But you never know who's out there listening. And the reality is that that's the possibility. But if you go into and you're like, oh, I'm going to spend an hour on a podcast or doing a podcast every week or whatever it may be, and I'm going to get some type of outcome from it, there's no way of knowing that.
Yeah. And I think that's so difficult, especially to those who are in the financial service industry, because even when I talk with people and I say, oh, I have a podcast in order to bring in leads, and they'll say, okay, well, every podcast that you do, how many leads does it generate?
All right.
It's like, sometimes none, sometimes 1 over 6. And I'm like, well, that's not a good lead gen. Like, you need to at least bring in 10 for every hour that you put into it. And that's not the way I feel the world works. It's not quantifiable in that.
That's exactly right. No, and I think, listen, I think that, that's where I think that most people go wrong, because they're so short-sighted on what something means or could mean. By the way, maybe nothing comes out of it. Right? And the worst case scenario is I sat here and had a great conversation with you. That's the reality. So if you go into it with all these expectations and all these agendas and that's how you're going to determine the outcome of this, there's no way that you're going to be able to, you're never going to be happy, because it just doesn't happen that quickly, So yeah, I think, going back to something we discussed a few minutes ago, is that giving yourself some grace and giving yourself some, the ability to take on and try different things. And, I always tell people that listen, I'm going to try it. And if I don't, if that hurts, I'm not going to do it again. And if it doesn't hurt, maybe we'll do it again, and that's kind of how I look at most of the things that we do on a daily basis.
Yeah. You mentioned about being happy, and earlier on in the conversation, you talked about how many of the wealthier people you work with, they thought that the money was going to bring them happiness, and it didn't. And I think to a lot of our listeners, that's going to be quite a surprise. I think of this old quote, I think it was Will Smith that said it, that when he was broke, he always knew that when he had money, he would finally be happy. And then when he got the money and realized he wasn't happy, he's like, oh, shit, I followed the wrong thing.
Right.
And I dedicated so much of my life to this thing. And I feel that so many people, when they look at people who have money, they think when they have the money, they will feel the way that that person feels about themselves.
Right.
But in truth, that person is dealing with the maybe different struggles, but similar struggles to you are. Like, they're not living in their light either. They might have money, that the money problem might be figured out, sure. But that doesn't mean that now they're worried about, are my kids going to be assholes? Are people just trying to get around me to get my money? Is somebody going to try to trip on my sprinkler outside to sue me? And like, now we have new problems. So where do you think this happiness actually comes from?
No, it's a character thing, right? And I do think that, it's how you handle that money and what that money means to you. And is it your identity, and is it who you are? And, is it giving you access? Are you still a good person? We deal with, on my job, I deal with family offices primarily, and then some athletes, some musicians, and some people in entertainment. And that's a side practice for me. So I have my family office practice, and then I have that. And a lot of people will ask me the differential between someone that's high net worth and a normal person. The reality is that they're human beings. They're the same people, right? They have different problems, and they have obviously different money levels and all that. And then people ask me the difference between high net worth and athletes, musicians, and entertainers. Same answer. They are exactly the same human beings when you get through all of the crap. When you get down to it, they're the same human beings. Make the same stupid errors, make the same amazing decisions, whatever it may be. We're all the same in that respect. When you get to how they perform on stage, or how they perform on a court or a field, or how they perform on in concert, different beings, right? The ability for people that are high net worth to make money, different beings. But when you get through it all, we're just a bunch of human beings that get together. And so my point in all that is that I do think that there is this misnomer that there is a differential of people with a tremendous amount of money and people not. The one thing that I will tell you, I think is the biggest difference is the natural insecurity at money. Money brings this weird non-purpose. I don't have a purpose. I've dealt with that. I'm insecure about why people are in my life. Are they there because I have a bunch of money? Are they there because they truly love me? Women, men, whatever it may be that come into someone's life. And then you have the kids that have this natural insecurity of being either well known in the community, well known on television, or their family's famous, or they're famous, or whatever it may be. That insecurity is always there with every decision that they make. Why are my friends my friends? Why are my girlfriends my girlfriends, or boyfriends my boyfriends, or whatever that is? And the money thing brings a whole different aspect. But I will tell you that most of the people that I deal with, the happiest of them, are the ones with much less money. Not, food stamps, that level, but not that much, not this wonderful, fabulous wealth that we all desire. And I do think that the character of somebody really comes out at that time. The last point I'll make is that I've had athletes that I worked with that when they came in and they were rookies, they were wonderful, wonderful people. And 3 or 4 years into the league, and they become much more popular and the scene, and and in my case, I deal with primarily only male athletes so far, and that those guys were the women and the money and the access and all the other stuff. 3 or 4 years into it, different human being, and that's a character issue.
I think about that often. Do you think that the money is the thing that changed them, or do you think the money just revealed who they really were the entire time?
Both. I think, they have a lot of people around them that are saying how awesome they are. And these guys are what I consider to be the leeches of it all, that these guys are all over them and telling them how amazing they are and how smart they are and how beautiful they are and talented and whatever. And I think that there's a belief that comes from that. And the other thing is that with a lot of these athletes and entertainers, they're very young, right? We expect these kids in their 20s to be handling millions and millions of dollars and be able to navigate who's there for their benefit or who's just one of the leeches that gets involved. So I do think that there's a lot of that. I also think that money brings access, money brings praise, money brings, or maybe it's backwards on that one, but I think money does a lot of things to people where they think that they've got this power because of how much money they have in the bank. I have a really hard time trying to navigate and trying to be the person that's there to support them at the same time that they're changing. I tell people that it feels like there's a light switch that goes on and all of a sudden I can be an asshole, right? It's just like wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And then I turn this light and then complete and absolute. And so unfortunately, I see that more times than not with the people that I've been fortunate to be around. And that's the unfortunate side of that discussion. And then there's some that navigate it wonderfully and are really nice people. And the unfortunate side is most of those they're few and far between.
Yeah. in this industry of financial advising, financial consulting, I think so many people, they look at it from the outside thinking, oh, it's all just math. It's clearly just, once you figure out the right numbers and you put into the spreadsheet, e-money, whatever the hell you're using, you put it out and then the person's going to be able to follow it to a T and it's all good. But what, what I've really dedicated my life to, especially in this field, has been towards understanding the mindset and getting people to understand who they are and how the money is really just an external relationship to the way they feel about themselves.
Right.
But when I say that to other people, especially those who are very versed in the financial advising space, they're like, no, it's about the money. Like, how much AUM do you have? That's all that really matters. So I'm kind of curious as to where you fall on that.
Listen, it depends on what your scorecard is. I mean, I have it's kind of like, you look at like Barron's and Forbes and all these, these awards that some people get assigned every year, and we've been fortunate enough to be recognized in those ways. To be honest with you, it's wonderful. Don't get me wrong. But if I get fired by a client tomorrow, they don't give a damn if I'm in Forbes or Barron's or whatever it may be. And how good of an advisor am I is only reflective in the way that my clients continue to stay with me. That's the only judgment that I have on that. The assets under management is important for sustainability in our business. I will tell you that, the question is how much is the right number. What drives me every day is my insecurity that, a client's going to let me go and it's going to be effectual on me. So if that happens, then I'm always planning on bringing in more people, more clients, hopefully, and building more relationships so that in case that should not happen. And we've kind of come to a point where we're picking and choosing the people that we want to deal with at this point, because it's about being happy with who you're spending your time with. And, I come from a realization that I don't know, and nobody knows how much time we have left on this planet, and not to get dour in any way, but the reality is, in my mind, is I want to spend time around people I want to spend time around with, and I don't want to spend time around people that I don't. And I've come to that realization, and there's times that I'll go to concerts by myself, and the reason for that is that I want to enjoy the music, and the other people that I know would not enjoy the music as much as I do and I'm happy to be by myself doing that kind of stuff. So, I say this all because I do think that it's, once again, going back to something we talked about earlier, it's good to understand who you are. I also think that how you judge yourself and how you scorecard what successful is it based upon assets under management, and therefore that's going to go into, production credits or whatever you call your pay structure? Or is it more important that you find a bunch of good relationships with people, with clients and friends and all of that? And that's more important. And, having a couple extra dollars is not that much incrementally changing of your lifestyle, and the time that you take away from your families to do those types of things is not as important as increasing your, spending time to increase your assets under management. And I know the debate, by the way, would be that, you run $2.1 billion and so therefore you can say these things. And maybe that's true, by the way. And maybe my perspective is skewed because of that. I will just tell you that just know that every single day I am doing everything I can to make sure that I maintain and grow what I've done, but I'm not going to grow it at any cost. I'm not going to, I want to enjoy the rest of my life as well. I will never retire, but I will I always tell people I'll be dead at my desk one day, and that's the way I want to go out, or playing golf. And so I do think it's we all have to understand how we scorecard what we believe is success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason I ask, it's extremely a selfish question, because I have very much indexed off my own internal scorecard of, impacting people's lives and like seeing them actually change at the expense of the AUM.
Hmm.
So that's why I'm kind of curious. Do you think that a flat fee model could be something sustainable in this modern day, or do you really need that AUM in order to be able to have the ability to live?
Yeah, no, we went to the flat fee, I don't know, 10 years ago or so. Prior to that, we were playing, on bond spreads and things like that. And I had run my business like that for many, many years. I will tell you that as an advisor, it was liberating to go through that process of not having to start off at zero every month. And it allowed me to spend a lot more time doing things that I thought I think are better for the client, meaning that I can do the research I want to do, and not worry about having to buy a bond or buy a stock or whatever. And that's allowed me to service them on a much higher level than I was able to do prior. I do think that we all have to determine what that best way to do it is for us. I do, though, think that, what's the average of financial advisors out there is $280 or $300 million of assets under management, I think, is the average. You got to determine what that means to you. If it's at a 1% fee or whatever it may be, and you're doing, whatever that turns out to be, right? Depending on that your fee structure, it may not be sustainable that way. If that's true, then there's other models out there. There's the private bank model. There's the team model with somebody else. There's a lot of different ways that this business can be structured for you. But I think my answer would be skewed because of our average fee is 30 basis points. But we can do that because of the scale. So it's unfair for me, I think, to answer that one for across the board, because I do think that when I did change over, I was already very skewed on what I was capable of doing as far as that was concerned.
Thank you for answering that for me. That was definitely a selfish question that I just wanted to know more about as I move my business more towards like an hourly rate and trying to figure out what's best for the client to make sure that I've been around, unfortunately, too many advisors that are more than willing to say they're doing what's right for the client, but they know, like, and from the back, when you're sitting at the same office with them, like, no, you're not.
Right.
That's why I really like the hourly model, is that it does level the playing field. Like, you really can't be doing anything other than what is going to get them to come back. Like,
let me make one comment on that, though. The one thing that I would tell you is that because when I look at some of the deepest relationships I have, one of the ways that those relationships started was when we went to the flat fee model. They knew I wasn't charging them for advice on various things that their accountant and their attorneys were. So they opened up. Well, first of all, you have to be able to have that conversation. They have to trust that, right? So I was very fortunate in that. But the second part is that they opened up much more and much more willing to talk about various things, because you're not on that, you're not charging them for that hourly. So that flat fee allowed that conversation to occur without them knowing that I was going to have to bill them for it. So that's the only thing I would be careful of with that model.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I have to consider that as well. Richard, we've talked about a lot of things, but I would be remiss, based off how much you study the economy, how much you study the macro, the micro, to at least not have a part of our conversation wrap around what the hell is going on right now in our world. Like, what does someone do, like, with everything that's coming at them?
It's a hell of a chore these days. Listen, I'm going to start off this with, I do know that I don't know. I do know that. I have a very strong opinion, and my unfortunate friends that decide to hang out with me hear about my opinion quite a bit. I will tell you though that there's so much coming at us at once. It's not like if we had taken tariffs by themselves originally, we can debate the concept of tariffs, right? You can tell me what your thoughts are on tariffs. I can tell you what my thoughts are on tariffs. We don't know what the outcome of tariffs are going to be. I can tell you in the first year, it reduced the debt by a little bit, a couple $100 billion. Now, whether or not there was other things that it hurt during that period of time, that's hard to quantify. Inflation was basically around the same level, slightly higher. So as much as people were so worried about tariffs and inflation and all this stuff, by the way, your inflation and my inflation are different, right? If you have a gas car, I have an electric car, right? You buy certain groceries. I don't buy certain groceries. I'm vegan. You're a meat eater, right? All those things are different. But if you just take the totality of the numbers that we receive from the CPI and the Consumer Price Index and something called the Personal Consumption Expenditures, PCE, those two things didn't show much of an increase, slight. So once again, I think the idea that we come up with on what each one of these things, tariffs, immigration, the war in Iran, the bombing 6 months ago, the Venezuela thing, we can debate that all day long. The reality is that we'll see what happens in the future from that. How we navigate that today, it's day to day. If you told me that we would be at war 2 months later and that oil would be at $111 a barrel or whatever it is, I think WTI is at 111 and Brent is at $100 or something today. If you would tell me that and that the markets would that would be slightly down from their highs, I would think that you were insane, right? Interest rates are higher, not lower. Interest rates are at 4.35 on the 10. And if it's the AI trade that's driving us, there's so much cash in the system, if it's foreign investors, if it's manipulated by algorithms, and that part I have no idea on. What I can tell you is that I look at the numbers every single month. I see that unemployment is very, very weak. I can see that inflation hasn't yet really gone up a lot. It's probably going to go up quite a bit here in a second, but I don't know that for sure either. So I think that we have to take each one of these day by day and making decisions. We bought a stock today. I won't go into which stock, but we bought a stock today, and because it's trading cheap, relatively, it's trading cheap historically. So we decided to start dollar cost averaging into a stock today. On the bonds, we're dollar cost averaging into the bond market and buying a little bit here and a little bit there. And every time we see a good bond, and we're buying that with the cash that we have on hand. The one positive thing that I did prior to the current administration coming into office was I really started accumulating cash. And so that cash has now sustained us for the past little bit. So these ups and downs have allowed for me to go in and buy stuff, right? Because people think that cash is a placement or a placeholder. Cash for me is an absolute decision to be made. When I put money into cash, it's for a specific reason. And so I knew with some certainty that we were going to have some type of chaos. I've seen this movie before, right? I've seen the chaos before. Forget COVID time, but even before that. And it's not because, once again, what my agreement or disagreement with what he's doing, but it was the idea of how it gets done. It's so hard and so driven and so sometimes so chaotic that causes that uncertainty for that moment, right? And that's what causes things to go down. And then the other thing, for 30 years, every single year, there's stocks that go down in value, and it allows me to buy stuff. Not all of them, and some do amazing. But every single year, there's stocks that just get hammered for whatever reason, a bad quarter, a bad statement, AI coming out and taking over software or whatever it may be. All those things cause opportunity. And so chaos is good for opportunity, but chaos also makes decision-making much more difficult. Mm-hmm. So to answer your question directly, I don't know what the hell is going to happen next. Nobody knows. I can't even tell you what's going to happen by the time I get home tonight. But I will tell you that we are doing everything to navigate the data. I don't like all the rhetoric and the pundits on TV telling us what's going to happen. And then when they're right, they get invited back. And when they're wrong, you never see them again. And all those types of things occur. So I'm just a data guy. I just go through the data. It's going to tell me not the full story, but it's going to tell me a lot of the story. I know that we've debated the idea that data is only a certain level of correctness. Mm-hmm. And it depends on where the data comes from and who it comes from. And we've created all this disjointment from what we've always used for all these years, that it's the idea of everything's fake in some way, or if it doesn't agree with you. And by the way, that comes from both sides of the aisle. So, but I do think that for me, data is the most exact thing that I can get. And so I'm going to follow the data. It's going to tell me as much as it possibly can. And that's kind of what we're doing right now. We're just running the data on this stuff.
And Rich, what would you recommend for the average listener hearing you, who's saying like, man, I don't have time to run the data. Like I'm at work all day. I'm just trying to honestly live my life. What does that person do?
Find someone that could help them. Listen, the funny thing about it is that I do think that there's a lot of people that don't need financial advisors, right? They just don't. They can do it on their own. And we're not this special, nerd that somehow, has all the answers. So if you're able to navigate that stuff and you're able to, and you want to run the numbers and you want to research it, and do your thing. And you don't need me for that. If you don't, you need to find someone to help you through this, because it is important. I wish there was an easier way to say that, or an easier way to do it. You can educate yourself, but this is a daily job for some of us. And so if you find the need and you don't have the bandwidth to spend the time to do it, because by the way, all this data that I run is all publicly available. There's nothing special in my numbers. I just take the government numbers and they have everything available in detail. So if you can't navigate it or don't have the bandwidth to do it, find a financial advisor that can do it for you and work with that person. And you got to find the right financial advisor and all that too.
How does someone find the right financial advisor?
I will tell you that when I get a new client, I tell them that we're going to date for a bit. Let's date. Because I'm going to tell you how awesome I am at the bar, and you're going to tell me how awesome you are at the bar. And the reality is that maybe true, maybe just BS that I'm telling you at the bar. Time will tell that. Time is revealing. And so during that, it's like anything. When you meet somebody at a bar, you meet a new client, they don't know you and you don't know them, right? They could be a terror or you could be a terror, and you're telling them once again, how awesome you are. So how would you get to know anybody ever, right? As I said, I'm going to show you a book of stuff that's going to say, I'm the best. Right. And then you're going to get some referrals from me, and I'm going to give you people that like me or buddies of mine that will tell you how great I am. Could be all BS. So come in with a discerning eye, come in with the idea that I'm full of shit. Come in with that idea. Let me prove that I'm not. And if I don't prove it, don't hire me or fire me, right? Because as I said, you need to find the right guy or a girl. A woman. Sorry, I say that all the time. And I do think that is very important to understand. There's a book that I give out to clients called Factfulness. And the idea behind that is that, and another book called Blink. I give 2 books out, but the idea behind that is critical thinking and coming with a discerning eye. We have as human beings, we have an innate want to believe what people are telling us. I come up with the idea that they're full of shit. So, and they have to prove that otherwise to me. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the differential of where I come from.
So trust but verify.
Trust
but verify. Even trust.
No, I don't. I have. I'm the guy with the RBF that's on the other side of the room, kind of looking at you, being that guy, until you can prove to me otherwise. I have a very large client that had her attorney come in, and a new attorney, and man, for the first 6 months, I gave him. I was just a complete jerk to him. And he proved to be a wonderful, wonderful human being and wonderful for this client. And I told him that. I was like, when you first came in, man, I was not happy at all. Because he had ideas, and I felt he was over lawyering, and I felt all this stuff. And the reality, it wasn't. And he was spot on, and he really cared about the client, and that's what I appreciate. So he proved to me over time that he was exactly of who he said he was up front. And in my world, that doesn't happen very often. Yeah. So.
Agreed. Richard, thank you so much for this very wide-ranging conversation. For our listeners, or before we close out, I'd love to give you the podcast. Is there anything that you'd like to talk about before we come to a close?
No, I think we went through a bunch of different things. There's a lot more meat to all of these conversations, and we're trying to get through this in an hour and a half. With the number of things that we went through, that's a 3-month conversation. But I think that just the one thing I will tell you is that, don't be fearful of failure and be discerning. Be discerning, I think, is the second thing that I would say have been the most important thing that I've learned over the years for me.
And where can our listeners go to find out more information about you?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I'm on LinkedIn at Richard McWhorter, McWhorter. Our company's name is SRM, Sam Robert Mary Private Wealth. We're in Beverly Hills, and our website is srmprivatewealth.com.
And to our listeners, all of that will be linked down in the description. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today for this very wide-ranging conversation. Like I told you when we started, I have no idea where these conversations are going to go. And even if it amounts to nothing, at least we both got to have a fun conversation, tell some stories, and learn from one another. So to our listeners, I hope that you got some value out of what Richard talked about, some very hard-fought lessons learned over his many years in this industry. So hopefully you can take some of those things and not have to make some of the same mistakes, or at least if you do make those mistakes, learn from them a bit faster. So please listen, and do us one favor. Just grab that link and send it to somebody in your phone book that needs to hear this conversation today. And with that, I'm Chris. He's Richard. We'll see you next time on The Fi Guys. Later.
This video podcast is sponsored by Monzon Wealth. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial advice. We do not endorse specific products or services. Past performance does not guarantee future results. The opinions expressed are those of the host and guests, not the podcast sponsor.
It is crucial to consult with a qualified financial advisor or professional who can provide advice tailored to your specific needs before making any financial decisions, investments, or taking any other actions. If you are seeking specified help, you can reach out to Chris at monzonwealth.com.